Argentina, en gráfica, en televisión, en medios radiales, todo el mundo habló esta semana de los billetes. Que el animalito, que si el prócer, que si las mujeres, que los protagonistas. Y en este caso hubo alguien que tuvo la ocurrencia de hacer billetes. Fíjense qué decidió el Estado, Gran Bretaña nada menos, con respecto al copyright de los billetes.
Hello, my name's Tom Hocknell. I'm curator of medals and modern money. I'm here to tell you about the bogs in the British Museum. And here it is. So, what is it? Well, it's a drawing of a banknote. And it's based on this. This is a Bank of England £5 note. And you can tell that it's not a genuine note, or I can tell because it is a drawing. But also, it's actually printed on one side only, whereas this banknote is printed on both sides. And it's made, or drawn, in the mid-1980s by an artist known as J.S.G. Boggs. He was American-born. He moved to London in 1980. And about 5 years later, he alighted upon the idea that he could literally draw his art and make money from it. Allegedly, this was in a restaurant one evening when a waiter looked at him drawing something on a napkin and said, "Oh, that's rather good. You could, use that to pay for your dinner or something." And he realised that actually this was a really good idea. He could literally draw his own money. And so he began to try to live his life literally by his art, by drawing these notes, which he would then go into restaurants or shops or to his landlord and attempt to pay, only ever spending them at face value. So if he went into a restaurant and the meal cost, for argument's sake, £4.50, he would hand over his drawing of a £5 note and ask for the correct amount in change. And there'd usually be an icy silence when he did this, before he explained that he was an artist and that if the recipient wanted, they could have a genuine £5 note to pay for the meal, or they could have a drawing. The choice was theirs. There was no attempt at subterfuge. And if they accepted, he asked for the correct amount in change and a receipt, which he retained, and they kept the drawing. Later on, his gallery would attempt to track down the note that had been spent and buy it back, usually at an inflated amount, thus ensuring that all parties to the transaction were happy, at which point they would reunite the drawing with the receipt and the change, and that would become the artwork. It was Boggs' attempt to mystify or blur the boundary between art, money, and functionality. Now, in 1986, he got his first solo exhibition at the Young Unknowns Gallery, which was a gallery down in Waterloo. And prior to that, he began to generate quite a lot of media interest. And the Daily Telegraph had suggested that what he was doing might be in contravention of counterfeiting laws. This panicked Boggs, and so he wrote to the Bank of England, to the governor at the time, asking for permission in order to reproduce his drawings of banknotes. The bank denied him permission, and so Boggs wrote again and asked them to come and take a look at the things that he was drawing because they couldn't possibly be confused for the real thing. This is an unusual case, he acknowledged. Would they give him permission in order to carry on drawing these copies of banknotes? Again, the bank declined. And this time, it instructed Scotland Yard to conduct a raid on the Young Unknowns Gallery. And 3 police officers turned up and they confiscated various works, literally pulling them off the walls, including this work. As you can see, this is the frame from the Young Unknowns Gallery. Scotland Yard decided that there wasn't enough evidence to prosecute. However, the Bank of England used its prerogative to bring about a private prosecution in order to bring Boggs to trial. And this was held at the Old Bailey in November 1987. In the meantime, Boggs became somewhat notorious throughout London for his work and for the impending court case. And he visited the British Museum in the autumn of 1987, where there was an exhibition co-curated by the bank and the British Museum exploring 300 years of the bank producing paper money. And a rather odd episode. Clearly his notoriety meant that he was recognised very quickly. Boggs went into the exhibition and, having had a look around, he sat down, took out his sketch pad and started drawing. This was clearly seen as a provocation, and a gallery warder came over to Boggs and said, "You can't do that, you're breaking the law." And Boggs sort of said, "Yeah, okay, whatever," and carried on drawing. Half an hour later, as he describes it, a big bouncer type came over and said, "Hello, Mr. Boggs, we're not supposed to be here, are we?" and promptly threw him out of the museum. As we shall see, that didn't entirely put Boggs off the museum, which proved a few years later with this drawing, which I'll come to in a minute. In the meantime, in November, the case went to trial. It was held over 4 days at the Old Bailey, and Boggs was represented by Geoffrey Robertson, QC. And his defence hinged on the application of the term reproduction. "What is a reproduction?" Geoffrey Robertson, QC, asked the jury. Well, first he suggested a reproduction is never worth more than the real thing, which of course Boggs's works were. Second, he suggested, only a moron in a hurry could mistake this for the real thing. And after 4 days, the jury agreed, and it took them 10 minutes to find him not guilty. At which point all the works were returned to Boggs, and he was able to leave the court a free man. The loss of the trial was a major embarrassment to the bank. Boggs was walking free from the trial with his works, and he was able to continue drawing notes knowing that there could not be a prosecution in the future. So what could the bank do? Well, it made one very important change to the design of its notes in future, which is not on this note, it would be on a modern note. What it did was to introduce the copyright symbol onto its notes. It says, "Copyright, the Governor and Company of the Bank of England 2016" on this note. And indeed, all modern Bank of England notes carry the copyright symbol, thus ensuring that if, in future, a prosecution for counterfeiting offences were to fail, the bank could always pursue a copyright infringement. This was one of the notes that was presented as evidence at the trial. You can see because it says Crown Court, Exhibit 3. So how did it get to the British Museum? Well, 3 years later, the museum was planning a major exhibition. We call them cross-departmental exhibitions, which means that it pulled objects from across the museum into one space. And the exhibition was called Fake, the Art of Deception. There we go, has a rather meaty volume with it. And the museum approached Boggs's solicitor in preparations for that exhibition and asked if he would consider lending a work. Boggs duly lent this work, and he even said that after the exhibition, if the museum wanted, he would be happy to donate it to the museum. And the museum's response can be seen in this letter from October 1990. It's a copy. The original is held by the Boggs estate. And it says, "Sir, I am directed by the trustees of the British Museum to convey to you this expression of their best thanks for your generous gift of your drawing of a £5 banknote, previously on loan to the Fake exhibition at the British Museum. I have the honour to be, sir, your obedient servant, David Wilson, Director." And that is how the Boggs came to the British Museum. Boggs left the UK in the 1990s and moved back to the USA, taking the vast majority of his archive with him. And in 1992, Boggs's Pittsburgh studio was raided by the US Secret Service, during which they confiscated many works, including those from the trial. This work was already in the British Museum by that point. Boggs died in 2017, and to date, this is the only work by him to have entered a UK public collection. It's unusual for us to acquire a work like this. After all, most of our notes in the collection look a little bit like this. They're not framed, not behind glass. They certainly don't have a Crown Court sticker on them. However, this, of course, tells the whole story. This frame is from the Young Unknowns gallery in Waterloo. And on the back, we can see Boggs's handwriting, a piece of paper. Boggs elucidates by saying, "These 4 drawings were prosecuted at the Old Bailey." And if you'd like to see it, it is currently on display in room 68, the Money Gallery, where it has recently gone on display next to a work by the artist Banksy. who in the early 2000s was printing notes in order to use in an art installation, and they very nearly got him into a lot of trouble. But that, as they say, is another story.